Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and riches, wisdom and might, honor and glory and blessing. And unto him who sits on the throne and unto the Lamb be glory, majesty, dominion, and power forever. Amen. I thought that would make a fitting benediction to begin this morning, since Jeremy used that text from Revelation chapter 5 as he was guiding our thoughts when we gathered around the table to take the Lord's Supper. And so that's why I wanted to bring it to mind again. It's good to have visitors among us. We welcome you, and we're thankful that you're with us and hope you'll be blessed from being here. I know I say that every time, or I try to remember to say it every time, but we have some who have been visiting for some time, and you're back with us again, and that's encouraging. We're glad, and it might be some who are here for the very first time. But if you have any questions at all about anything that you see or hear about our convictions concerning the Word of God and where we stand, about your salvation, please don't hesitate to let us know. We'd be happy to open the Scriptures with you and make sure that you know the will of God for your salvation. The setup is a little different this morning, and so I was going to teach from the floor. I've done that before once or twice, but I was told by some of our members who are, let me say discreetly, more diminutive in stature, that I don't want to say short, and I don't want to name any names. Marie Redwine. I don't want to name anyone in particular, but those who are sitting in certain places who are, let's say, petite. That's a pleasant sounding word. Petite. I have a little bit of trouble seeing, I guess, when I'm on the floor, but I may still do that from time to time. But that reminds me that it's Sister Marie's birthday today, right? So happy birthday to you. And I'm not going to say which birthday it is. I'll let you ask her that. I'm terrified of Marie. I'm not going to cross her or tease her anymore, or she'll get me. Who is Jesus Christ? There is no more important issue in life. And I would argue that every single human being on the face of the earth should be occupied by this question, the identity of Jesus Christ. Everyone should be seeking earnestly to come to a correct understanding as to who Jesus really is. Is he truly who he claimed to be? What are we to make of his claims? What are our options when it comes to Jesus? Well, we're here today, we who are members of the church, those of you who are believers, we're here because it is our firm conviction that he is who he claimed to be, and that therefore he is the divine Son of God. Most people in the world do not hold that view of Jesus. And yet, most people who would not go so far as to say that Jesus is the divine Son of God, that he is God himself, still believe Jesus was a great man in history, still think of Jesus as a great moral teacher. So that seems to be the position that most people take who do not believe on him and do not accept him as Lord over their lives and do not submit to his teaching. They still have a favorable view toward him as this man of tremendous influence. But the lesson that I started last Sunday morning and that I'm going to continue and conclude now is to show us that that is really not an option that is available to us. Not if we're going to be honest, not if we're going to be careful and rational with the evidence. And so we said when we look at the claims of Christ, really, there are really only three views that we can end up taking. Either he was a deceiver, he was a liar, or he was a madman, a lunatic, or he really is who he claimed to be. And so we took this trilemma, as it's called, famously argued by C.S. Lewis, and we said we're going to make this a question that we want everyone to ask himself about Jesus. Was he a liar? Was he lunatic? Or was he really who he claimed to be, the Lord of all? So that's what I asked you last time to write at the top of the page if you're taking notes, and that's what we're going to now continue to discuss and conclude our thoughts on this. We not only looked at it last time in the Sunday morning lesson, but I addressed it further in our second service on Sunday when we came back together on Sunday evening, and we talked a little bit about it too Wednesday night when we had our first Vacation Bible School gathering. So we've really been saturating our minds with thoughts along these lines. And so last time, what did we say? We said the way that critics, the way that skeptics try to answer this argument is to say, well, really there's another option here on the table. And that is, and you can use the alliteration we pointed out, and that is that he is a legendary figure. Not that he wasn't a real historical figure, because no serious scholar would hold that view, and no one who's looked honestly and carefully at the historical evidence could come to the conclusion that Jesus of Nazareth never existed. But what I mean here is they will argue that he didn't really say the things that the disciples claim that he said about himself, but that those were things that they embellished, they were exaggerated over time until over a number of generations you finally had this elaborate legend develop about Jesus being deity, being more than a mere man, being actually God come to us in the form of a man. They would argue that, well, he didn't really say those things about himself. Those things were just put in his mouth. And so that's what we addressed last time. I showed that that really isn't a rational option, and that there is no reason to take that position. There's no grounds to hold that view. If we really look objectively at the historical documents that come together in the New Testament, we cannot accept that idea that this was just a legend about Jesus that developed over time. Whatever you want to make of his claims, he really did say those things about himself. And so we're back to our three options. So that's what I want to explore with you now. And if you're interested in what we said about that and you weren't here last Sunday, that is available at our YouTube channel, and you can find that lesson, the first part of this two-part series. I encourage you to take a look at that. Well, let's recall once more, but now go into a little more depth about the claims of Christ. What kinds of things did Jesus say about himself? And I'm going to pull a few of these out to look at with you in a way that I did not last time. Though we did put this before you, Jesus said things about himself, that he was the Son of God, that he had the power to forgive sins, that he was of one nature with the Father, that he would judge all men, that he was in fact the truth, that he always existed. All these things that we looked at. Let's pull out a couple of these. What about the idea that he could forgive sins? That Jesus actually claimed to be able to forgive people's sins. Now there's this famous account in Mark's gospel that you find also in Matthew. In Mark chapter 2 is where we find it in Mark's gospel, where they bring to Jesus a man who was lame for Jesus to heal him. But before Jesus heals him, before he addresses his physical needs, he addresses the needs of his soul with this startling statement. He says, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now, think of how radical it is for a human being to say that to someone. See, it would be one thing, let's say if Edgar smacked his brother. I don't know if that ever actually happened in the Johnson household. I'm guessing it did a lot, but let's just say he smacked his brother And it would be one thing if his brother said, you know what, it's okay, Edgar, I forgive you. But imagine if I walked up to the two of them and said, it's okay, Edgar, I forgive you. As though I am the offended party. Well, of course, you'd think I'm out of my mind. On what grounds could I forgive someone for the wrong he had done to someone else and not to me? But you see, Jesus speaks as though he, in every sin, as though he himself is the offended party. It's incredible. And look at the reaction that it elicited. Notice that some of the scribes were sitting there questioning in their hearts, why does this man speak like that? How dare he? He is blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone? See, it did strike them as absolutely outrageous for someone to come along and claim to be able to forgive sins. But Jesus claimed that. Of the couple other claims we'll look at, what about this one? Maybe you hadn't thought about how radical a claim this is, that he will come and that all men will stand before him in judgment, and that the fate of every single human being will be determined by him and what people do with him. Think of that. I'm talking here about things like in John 5:22 and 23, Jesus says, the Father judges no one, but he's given all judgment to the Son. Jesus is referring to himself. That all may honor the Son just as they honor the Father. Jesus said, you're to honor me in the same way you honor God himself, God the Father. And he says, whoever does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him. And so here comes a man who has the boldness to actually assert that the way you treat me is the way you're treating God himself, and that you ought to honor me in the same way that you honor God. And that whether or not you'll be accepted or rejected by God will be determined by whether or not you accept me. When he was on trial before the Jewish high council, and the high priest said to them, this is just before they condemned him and eventually handed him over to Pilate to be crucified. But the high priest said to him, I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. And Jesus answered with an idiomatic expression. He said, you have said so. In other words, yes, what you said is true. But then he says this, but I tell you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man. That's the way Jesus referred to himself. And this, they knew, was an allusion to what was said in their scriptures centuries before by the prophet Daniel about the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven to reign, to rule over all. You'll see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. So in other words, you're going to see me one day reigning over all, with authority over all, coming with clouds. That's coming in judgment, coming to pour out the judgment of God. Jesus says that about himself. Staggering. Well, again, you see the reaction that they had. When he said that, the high priest, verse 65, the high priest tore his robes and he said, he's uttered blasphemy. What further witnesses do we need? You've now heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment? They answered, he deserves to die. And understandably, if those things were not really true, then Jesus was blaspheming in the claims that he was making about himself. What about the fact that Jesus said, I am without sin? I did not have that earlier on the slide, so I'm working that in to include it here. Just a passing remark. But you see this over and over, where Jesus talks about people needing forgiveness and people being in sin, yet implies again and again that he himself was without sin. And in fact, in John 8, on one occasion, he actually challenged the Jewish leaders who were in an intense debate with him at that point. He said, which one of you convicts me of sin? Name me, show me a sin that I have committed. Bring the proof. Where is it? What sin have I done? Who speaks this way? Who claims that, look at my life, scrutinize what I say and what I do, no sin will you find. That's what Jesus said about himself. No one has ever spoken this way about himself. And then what about this, as I mentioned earlier, where he said that he was the truth? Now, you have figures come on the scene that come along in history who will say that they're pointing you to the truth and that you ought to believe the truth and that what they're telling you is the truth. But Jesus goes further than that. When he actually says, as he's talking to his disciples, John 14:6, I am the truth. I am the way and the truth and the life. And then he says, once again, that no one can be saved apart from him, apart from accepting him. No one comes to the Father except through me. So Jesus claims to be the very embodiment of truth, the very personal representation of ultimate reality. Let that sink in. Don't let your familiarity with these things that Jesus says about himself cause you to miss just how stunning these claims are. I am the truth. And then, of course, this one, most provocative of all, where he used the language explicitly used of Yahweh, of God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, their fathers, when in a heated discussion, that same discussion with the Jews in John 8 that I just referred to, and Jesus tells them that they were acting much differently spiritually than their father Abraham. And he told them, Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. And they said, you're not 50 years old, and you've seen Abraham? And that's when Jesus answered and said, notice this incredible passage here in John chapter 8. If I can get it to pull up here. I think it's frozen. That was going to be so good, I built up to that so well. Did you like that? And then now, nothing. There it is. Truly, truly, I say to you. Now, it doesn't say, before Abraham was born, I came to be, or I was. But he says, when they said, you're not 50 years old, you're talking about seeing Abraham. And Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am. The ineffable name of God that they wouldn't even write, that they wouldn't even pronounce for fear of misusing, of misstating, and treating the name of God irreverently. And Jesus comes along and takes the language that the Lord God himself used when he revealed himself to Moses at the burning bush. And he said, well, who are you? Who am I to say you are? And he said, I am. And then Jesus comes along and says, before Abraham was born, I am. They understood what he meant by that. Timeless existence. God himself. And that's why the text tells us they took up stones to kill him. Right then and there, they tried to murder Jesus Christ. Once again, from their point of view, he was blaspheming. And of course, if these things were not true, then certainly he was. And when you look at these claims, understand how unique they are among the world's religions. There is no parallel in other religions. The Buddha never claimed these kinds of things about himself. Confucius, with millions of followers to this day, never said anything close to this kind of thing. Muhammad, if you had asked Muhammad, are you Allah? Are you God himself? He would have charged you with blasphemy and likely had cut off your head, as he did to many others who did not agree with his claims. But that's a claim he certainly would never have made about himself. Only Jesus makes these claims about himself. And when you look at them, they're from a human standpoint, they're absolutely appalling, supremely arrogant, outrageous to say these things about himself, outrageously delusional if they're not true. And yet, at the same time, he claims to be meek and humble and lowly. He calls men to come to him in Matthew 11 because I'm meek, I'm gentle, and lowly in heart. And that's how most people view him. They look at his example, they look at his teaching, they look at him yielding himself up to die on behalf of the world, and they think, yes, look at the humility of this man. Look at his meekness. Well, how can that be if he's making what would be the most arrogant, outrageous claims ever made by any human being in all the history of the world? How do you reconcile that? That's what we're addressing here. That's what we're saying. This option that, well, he was just a great moral teacher, no, that's not one that we have available to us. He was either intentionally deceiving people, claiming things about himself that he knew were not true, or he really believed them and was out of his mind to think such preposterous things about himself. That's why we say he would either be a liar or a lunatic. See, but how do you reconcile that with his teaching? So we looked at the claims of Christ. Now, think of the claims of Christ in light of the teaching of Christ. Because it's his teaching that has made such a profound impression on even those who do not believe in him as the Son of God. I mean, Jesus' teaching is universally recognized as deep, lofty, profound. It manifests an insight, an understanding of the human condition that is unparalleled. It's not sloppy idealism, as Lewis says. It shows a shrewdness, a wisdom that when you look at it, you realize this is true to life. This man had tremendous insight into the human psyche, into the state of the world, into the way that we behave and our motives for what we do. The sanity, the wisdom of Jesus' teaching, that is universally acknowledged. The profundity, the perceptiveness of his teaching, it's not seriously questioned even by opponents of Christianity. In other words, he's not some delusional, raving madman. He could not be and teach the kind of things that he taught. Read the Sermon on the Mountain. Does that sound like a madman? Does that sound like someone who's possessed of a demon? That's what some claimed about him at one point. Like in John chapter 10, there was, we're told, a division among the Jews because of what Jesus was saying about himself. And so many said he has a demon. He's insane. That's the lunatic option that some people were taking. He's insane. He's out of his mind. Why listen to him? Oh, but notice how people reacted to that. Wait, others said, these are not the words of one who is oppressed by a demon. No, that doesn't make sense. He doesn't talk like a raving madman. This man, his wisdom, his knowledge, his understanding, what he taught, and the way he taught it made such a profound impact and still does, even on people who do not believe that he is the Son of God. And so think of you see a division there? Think of the kinds of reactions that Jesus elicited. Really, there are basically only three. These are basically the only responses that people had to Jesus. It was either raging hatred, which is what led to his crucifixion, or absolute terror, or adoration that leads to full submission. But this idea of some other option, of just casual approval, hey, this Jesus guy, I don't believe these things he's saying about himself, but you know what? He's got a lot of good things to say that show a lot of insight, and I really like his teaching. I think I'm going to adopt his teaching, but no, that's what we're saying is that option, this idea that he could say those kinds of things about himself and still be this great moral teacher, that is not an option that we have available to us. Let me return once more to how poignantly C.S. Lewis, set the options before us. You remember I showed this last time. He says, you must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But this option that most people take in the world toward him is not one that makes sense. Let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. We give this lesson because that's the posture a lot of people take toward Jesus, and it makes no sense. That's what we want to help people to see. Remember what we said earlier, these claims that Jesus makes about himself? How appalling, how arrogant, how outrageous. They would be the ravings of a delusional madman if they're not true. But what if they are? They are. That's the rational conclusion that you have to reach. No, these other options, they make no sense if you really weigh them and think carefully about them. All that you're left with, if you're going to be honest with the evidence about Christ, is that he is, in fact, who he claimed to be. And so you've got to make a decision. That's what Christ does. He presents himself to us, and we have to decide, are we going to accept what he says about himself, or are we going to reject it? Those are our only options. And every single one of us must decide what he is going to do. I have to decide, what am I going to do with this Jesus? And think of how ironic that is. This idea of what am I going to do with Jesus? When really the greater question is, what is Jesus going to do with me? Because my fate is in his hands. And what Jesus does with me will depend on what I do with him. And so what about you? What will you do with Jesus? That will determine one day what he will do with you, whether he will welcome you into eternal glory. Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you for the foundation of the world, or whether he will send you away from God forever. Depart from me, ye cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Matthew 25. You must decide. Choose wisely. Make the right choice. Fall at his feet. Submit to him as Lord. And let us know if we can help you do that. Let's stand and sing this song together.